Labour are struggling at home. Keir Starmer is less popular than Rishi Sunak, and the Labour Party as a whole are just a few points ahead of the leaderless Tories. A polling company asked people what word best described Starmer, and they came back with liar, boring, weak and an idiot. It's fair to say that some people did think he was good, though, as well. But are things worse abroad? Is the Labour Party now an international embarrassment? We've had David Lammy causing a major international diplomatic incident by claiming that Azerbaijan liberated itself despite being guilty of committing genocide against Armenian Christians. He also decided to turn up to meet the US President Joe Biden in his trainers. This led some people to ask if we should have a whip round for some smart shoes, but presumably Lord Ali can take care of that. We've got Keir Starmer nipping off to Italy to meet their leader, Giorgia Meloni, desperately trying to figure out how on earth she stops illegal immigration. She then released this video during which she told illegal immigrants that if they come to Italy, she'll just deport them, something Keir Starmer doesn't really want to do. Starmer then waded back into foreign policy when talking about the Israel-Hamas war and made this catastrophic blunder.
I call again for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the return of the sausages, the hostages.
Oh, have the sausages returned? We don't know, do we? Now, it turns out that Lord Wahid Ali, who has been the government's sugar daddy, met with brutal Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad on several occasions and called for him not to be deposed. Now we know that Starmer has just met up with Trump at Trump Tower. The former US president was actually very diplomatic about meeting the Labour Prime Minister.
Well, I'm going to see him in about an hour, so I have to be nice, right? Yeah. But I actually think he's very nice. I think he ran a great race. He did very well. It's very early, but he's popular, and I'll be seeing him, and I'll send you regards.
Yeah, now, of course, the left-wing media won't like this, but actually Donald Trump was much more diplomatic than Keir Starmer, who said Donald Trump endorses Boris Johnson, another reason to hashtag vote Labour on the 12th of December, and, of course, David Lammy, who called Trump a woman-hating neo-Nazi sympathiser. Oh, yeah, and then, of course, there is Labour MP and part-time DJ, Emily Thornberry, who has just said this.
What a lot of Labour people will be wondering, I think, is whether or not this provides an opportunity to be really blunt with Donald Trump about what you think of him. Do you still think he's a racist?
Yes, and
Great. Keir Starmer cancelled Rwanda on day one and didn't bother to tell the Rwandan government, but now it looks like the Germans will use Rwandan facilities paid for by the British taxpayer to send illegal immigrants to. That happened shortly after Keir Starmer met with the German Chancellor. And he's just handed £84 million of your money to African and Middle Eastern countries in the vain hope that that will stop illegals coming to Britain, which it won't. Oh, and just to round us off on the international embarrassment stakes, I bet the international human traffickers just love this, don't they? Yeah, absolutely. Refugees welcome. That's our Home Secretary. So when you add all of that up, is the world laughing at Labour? Let's get our thoughts on my panel this evening. I am, of course, joined by the wonderful communications officer at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Isreem Ibrahim. I've got columnist and political commentator Patrick O'Flynn, and making his debut on my panel, but of course, by no means on the channel, is the wonderful journalist and broadcaster JJ Anasobi. I'll start with you, Reem. Do you think that Labour have turned Britain into an international laughingstock?
They definitely have, although I do think that a lot of the criticism seem to be focused on the government themselves. I mean, you outlined some of those scandals, just some of them. I mean, the Lord Ali situation, the fact that he was given number 10 pass, I think that just domestically speaks really, really badly and just smells of corruption. Internationally, David Lammy, I think, is a complete joke. I mean, the fact that he's using language that is just so strong against somebody who could very well effectively completely ruin the international relationship with the US. So I think it's really important that we do recognise this does have international outcomes.
Yeah, indeed. Patrick, what's your view on this? The idea that Labour now, when you kind of rack all of that up, are just the laughingstock of the world?
Well, I enjoyed your entertaining sort of stitching together of the sort of crocheted blanket, as it were. But I actually think Keir Starmer hasn't really changed our foreign policy very much. And I almost think he is actually looking a bit of a grown-up compared to, as we know, the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, has made a lot of blunders already and has got a long back catalogue of kind of shock-jock pronouncements. So he was an odd choice. Emily Thornberry, let's not forget, despite the relative thinness of talent and experience available to Keir Starmer when he was forming his government, she didn't make the cut, right?
No.
And I think we can now see why she didn't make the cut, even in a cabinet.
But she is in the Labour Party. She is
absolutely
a member of the Labour Party, and that is
absolutely. But I would say of Keir Starmer on this issue, particularly on the relationship with the United States, clearly he doesn't like Donald Trump. Donald Trump doesn't like him. Donald Trump's a pro, as we saw there, about, you know, if he wins the presidency, the UK is an important ally, and Keir Starmer's in for a reasonable length of time. And Starmer as well, I think he said in terms, it's about the relationship rather than who occupies the office.
Well, you'd have to say that, wouldn't it, really?
I just think on foreign policy, I think he's less vulnerable than someone on some of the domestic stuff.
I mean, the Italians are almost definitely laughing at us, JJ, you know, because we can see, can't we, the idea that, you know, Giorgia Meloni is there, Starmer goes over, gosh, just tell me how you did it. She goes, oh, well, I was all right with people turning boats back. I wanted them processed offshore, and I've told people that if they come here illegally, I'm going to deport them. And Starmer goes, that's magic. Then comes home and doesn't do any of that.
I don't think people in other countries care one iota about the UK, just as we don't care about the other countries. When you look at Silvio Berlusconi, he was the biggest clown going. We did not sit around in the UK discussing what a joke Italy are, look how embarrassing they are. When you look at the current president of Argentina and the crazy things he comes out with, we comment on it, but we're not losing sleep over it.
Excellence that Millet comes out with. I think Millet is one of the most respected presidents in the world.
I think that's I disagree with you on that, and I think it's debatable. However, there are banana republics all over the world, and you have even when Trump was in power, it made for good entertainment, but no one in this country was really losing sleep over it. I think there's too much emphasis.
That's my point. OK, so laughingstock is one thing, but do you honestly think that they really respect Keir Starmer and David Lammy? When David Lammy walks into a room, does that scream respect to you?
Not as much as David Cameron had. He was our last Foreign Secretary before Lammy, and Cameron had a gravitas, perhaps because he'd been Prime Minister, or maybe just because he was a better statesman than David Lammy is. I can see Richard Tice, for example, a friend of mine, when he was campaigning, he would wear trainers sometimes because he's walking around all day. I don't understand why David Lammy is wearing trainers. He's jumping on private jets to go to meetings. He's been chauffeur-driven everywhere. Yeah. Put a pair of shoes on, mate.
I think those things matter slightly less. I think what matters is the fact that people like David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, the person that is supposed to be representing the UK on the world stage, just does not represent British people. He just says things that are absolutely outrageous. I mean, calling Trump a neo-Nazi...
Well, it's not just Trump, by the way. Sorry to interrupt you, Irene, but, I mean, you know, any member of the Conservative ERG, who, by the way, you know, roughly speaking, about 52%, at least in one snapshot in time, of the British public were aligned with, he thought they were worse than Nazis, which just begged the question, what is worse than a Nazi? We haven't got time to go into that tonight. But you know, it just begs the question, doesn't it? What was worse than... But he thought they were worse than that.
He did, but I don't think he necessarily knows what he believes. I think the point is that he just doesn't come across as serious. And ultimately, I think the difference between him and Trump... Now, I'm no huge Trump fan. I think he's rather authoritarian on many issues. But actually, with this particular perspective, Trump is coming across as though he's a lot more serious. And even though Starmer comes from a completely different political aisle, actually that respect, the fact that the UK and the US's relationship matters, I think, is emphasised more.
I'm just going to bring Patrick to...
Yeah, well, I would say just don't forget that we went through the election and we had a Prime Minister in Rishi Sunak who couldn't even be bothered to stay for the full D-Day commemorations, and Keir Starmer did, right? So I just think on the international stage, he's not an obvious disaster. He kind of looks the part. He's a bit dull. I think we'll get him on some of the domestic policies.
I would also add that I'm a Labour supporter, but my issue with Emily Thornberry and David Lammy is that it's selective outrage. They're angry that they hate Donald Trump. He's this, he's that. Well, what about Xi Jinping of China? We give him a nice state welcome. He got to meet the Queen, gets to go to Man City. That man has committed atrocities atrocities in China, but he gets the carpet rolled out for him. No one is on the
Against
street.
Muslims as well.
Against Muslims, yeah.
Against Uyghur Muslims. Again, there's selective outrage there, isn't there? You know, we hear a lot about genocide, and then you've got a bloke there, Xi Jinping. If he decided he wanted to come back again, the red carpet would be straight back out.
Absolutely.
We'd be getting on the phone to the royal family, going, go on, another state banker. If you still got a string quartet, go on, bring them back out. You know, please, do everything we possibly can. I imagine, though, that the Germans as well appear to be laughing at us a little bit. So, because they do. He goes over there and he goes, oh, I'm worried about these irregular migrants. Germany goes, you're worried about them? Well, we're going to use your taxpayers' money to send those irregular migrants to the facilities you built in Rwanda.
It's absolutely mental. It is funny when you look at it from that perspective, but it's also terribly sad. I mean, this is taxpayer money that's been going to institutions that have been built specifically for those particular people. And actually, I don't necessarily think the Rwanda scheme would have worked in the long term. But even if you think that in the short term it could have actually done something, the perspective that actually Germany are now using things that are taxpayer-funded, British taxpayer-funded, I think it's outrageous. Just on that point about that particular perspective around racism and that kind of thing, I think what's really interesting with Lamy, so when Rupert Haque said that Kwasi Kwarteng was superficially black, people like Lamy were completely silent about it. And so I think it's really important. I know Xi Jinping is a very good example, but even just taking a step back within their own party, they were not willing to call out that kind of racism.
Just on one thing, just to crowbar this in right at the end, if you don't mind, you mentioned about some of the domestic issues. Well, Lord Wahid Ali is a problem for Labour at the moment.
Absolutely.
He's been their sugar daddy for goodness knows how long by the looks of things.
Absolutely.
But now the latest is this business of him. He went and met Bashar al-Assad several times and then didn't want him to be deposed. Well, that's very curious.
That's right. That shows that he far from being just a kind of no-strings bankroller because he supports the Labour Party, he has his own particular political agenda, and some of it seems very unappetising. So that really is a big problem for Keir Starmer. He got far too close to one donor rather than having an array of donors each with less sway. And I do think that's dented his image and profile long term, not just among right of centre voters, but across the whole.
So you should have many
spectrum.
sugar daddies.
Well, I think you should have many moderate scale donors rather than depending on one huge sugar daddy for everything. And I think there's news stories out about even more clothes.
Yeah, 16 grand.
Another 16,000.
So that would take it. I saw someone tweet this out earlier. So by their calculations, it was about 30 grand of clothes from one bloke. That's before. I think I'm right in saying this before we factored in his wife's wardrobe.
Yeah.
It's a lot of clothes. 30 grand. I could do some damage there.
I'll take that credit card.
Yeah, exactly. All right, guys. Look, lovely stuff. Thank you very much. Great to get us going there with all of.